way to start. We're, what are we, 10 minutes ahead of schedule. Let's hope we can stay on track with that. So I guess there's really two fundamentals I'd probably like for you to take home today. One is a little bit of structure around your thinking around what farm succession is. And if I just challenge one of Andy's points about, he talked about the start and the end of journeys, and I don't think it's that at all. I think, and Lorna talked about a diagram yesterday with some circles in it, and I think it's very much a circular thing. I think the word journey's become a bit unpopular from John Mitchell back in the All Black coaching days, but it is a journey, it's not a destination, and it's something that evolves and continues. So that's the first thing I'd like you to think a little bit about, is some structure around your thinking. And the second thing is I'd like to encourage you to think a little bit about process, because I tend to find when we look at challenges, when we tend to implement things, if we have quite a solid process behind us, then that creates a lot of certainty and a lot of points of reference for us. Interesting, Andy talked a little bit about how the dairy industry got going in terms of entrepreneurial ability. So I want you to think a little bit about the roles in business. The role in the business as you grow it, the role in business as you enter it, and I guess think fundamentally about the components of that and what your journeys are. So, I was told not to use that. So I think let's talk a little bit about the operational side of the business. And we spent a little bit of time yesterday afternoon talking a lot in that area, and there's a bit more coming on that. I encourage around farm succession to think that part of your business will evolve every 10 years, plus or minus. So this is thinking about the things that we're doing in the dairy industry around genetics we've talked about. We talked about the feed stuff, and the interesting, I think, we talked about a 20-year cycle of feed genetics yesterday. But also, I think from a personal point of view, let's think about pathways in the operational side of the business. And talking to Simon this morning about his dad at the age of 73, is still connected somewhere in here. He's abdicated a fair component of what that operational responsibility is about. But so for that generation, it's managing their pathway quietly out of that circle. For a younger generation, it's managing their pathway into that circle. And in farm succession, that's quite often where we have the arm wrestle. Really interesting yesterday, the advanced party guys talked a lot about one of the successes of their discussion groups and their field days is about the trust they've got within their business. And I think the thing that runs parallel with that in farm succession is not just trust, but respect. And when we look at the journeys coming in and going out of those circles, when we have those two components as the basis for our communication and conversation, then I think we make some serious progress and get satisfaction. This is where the cash is generated in our business. So there's a lot of responsibility sits up here. Fundamentally, if we're looking to achieve anything for the family, it's going to come down to two choices. Is our business making cash, and have we got time to implement? So that's a critical enabler that we'll talk about later on in terms of some change process on what that means. The other major part of the circle there is the investor circle. And I encourage people to think that's a 100-year journey. That's across generations. The African tribes talk about we don't inherit land from our grandparents, we borrow it from our grandchildren, which introduces the sentiment sometimes with the farming investment that we have up there, which sometimes doesn't make our journey any easier. But it also can be quite powerful. So this is separating now all of a sudden what's happening on a daily basis in the operational side of our business to the long-term strategy around our capital. We have, one of the conversations we had last night was there's an arm wrestle going on here around the family capital. And that's the legacy that some families end up bringing forward from previous generations. It's good to see some journalism students here. Fantastic, reporting on the good stuff, which is what we need a bit in agriculture. But that's where we historically have had the focus. We've had drama, we've had tragedy being reported on farm succession around what's happened with the family capital. And that's not something that encourages everybody to engage in the succession process. But we'll try and get over that, and we'll talk about that shortly. So that is thinking about the long-term protection of capital. It's thinking about the long-term return of our capital and what that means for family members. Andy's already done half my speech already on the entrepreneurial stuff, but that's a fantastic area when we start looking forward as well. We've got a generation who've been in the industry for 20 or 30 or plus years, and they've got experience, they've got relationships, they've got resilience, they've got a whole bunch of things which are fantastic in the entrepreneurial stuff. And the reason the circles don't overlap is sometimes we've got talents in the family which don't have anything to do with your commodities, or too much to do with the assets you've got invested. but they're fantastic things that can operate down here. So the entrepreneurial ability for families in succession is we're starting to change the conversation from saying we've got a piece of pie, how do we cut it up, to saying we've got a bunch of talents, we've got some income streams, we've got some asset, and we've got some passion and enthusiasm for things outside farming as well as inside farming. So the succession conversation then becomes, what do we create as a family? What's our legacy? That's a much more enabling thing than saying we've got a piece of pie, how do we cut it up? So that's the first takeaway point. Let's think a little bit about our journey in the succession planning process of our business, and think a little bit about other people's journeys in the succession planning process. So there's 4 steps in managing change. When we talk about farm succession, we tend to get probably a bit of a flood of this. And I encourage people to acknowledge that and think a little bit about those 4 families of emotions, which drive our behaviour. There's 2 families of emotions that are enabling, are energising, which is these 2 families of emotions. A little bit of discontent, mild end of angry, I think is really healthy. Really healthy. Do nothing with it. We kind of struggle with it. The energies kind of build up a little bit, and it's where we end up probably with the other side of journalism that we don't necessarily want on the front page of the paper. But a little bit of discontent in your business is fantastic. People aren't happy with status quo. That's pretty common. Could be one generation saying, not happy with their standard of housing, not happy that kids are looking for weekends off or not doing the hard yards like we used to do, or they've got 2 cars and Sky TV and they still want to do something else that we never did when we were young. Or it could be the younger generation saying, I'm not prepared to work weekends for half the wage that my mates in town work, and they're getting twice the pay, they're doing half the hours. So there's all sorts of areas of discontent. A little bit of discontent's fantastic. It means actually we've got the energy to come and get some issues on the table and start to implement some things to happen and have some discussion. The other family of emotions, happy emotions, that's fantastic. So we've got venison schedules here, and there's a demand for velvet, and we've got some really good things going on in your industry. We've got some other sectors in commodities that probably aren't enjoying the same ride, so we understand the circular nature, which you had yesterday. But happy business is obviously something that people are pretty happy to come and talk and get involved about, so that's fantastic. 2 other families of emotions aren't so probably enamouring. So these are de-energising. Let's think a little bit about historical, I guess, what the issues have been around farm succession that get reported on. So yes, there's drama, yes, there's tragedy. And I guess we were having the conversation this morning and saying that I think we're getting almost immune and desensitised to drama and tragedy. The first 5 items on the news, the first front page or 2 of the paper are all about drama and tragedy, and we're getting over that a little bit. But there is an element of this when we start to conjure up succession. So we do have a bit of trepidation around what's this about. Sometimes it's the legacy of what's gone on before us. Sometimes it perhaps is something that we've seen in our community, that there's been some poor outcomes. So we need to understand that, and we need to understand that when we sit at the table and we're having a discussion around the family, or we're trying to have the discussion, and there's some people are starting to back away or folding their arms or looking the other way or don't want to get engaged. It's thinking about what's going on here. Likewise, scared's a wee bit the same. So if we think about that, seriously depressed people, no energy, paralysed with fear kind of stuff. So that's the extremes of these. But sometimes in our family discussions, we have reasons for people to be quite valid concerns around farm succession. We've got a lot at stake in these conversations. They talk about crucial conversations have got 3 components. The stakes are high, everybody's got an opinion, and there's an emotional component in there. So the stakes are high. There's reason to have some concern, absolutely. We've got a couple of million reasons on the balance sheet for a start. We've got family relationships and grandparents and grandchildren and all sorts of things going on there. So there are valid concerns. We just need to allow for that, to understand it, to recognise it where it is going in our family discussions and work with it. Sometimes just getting it on the table, validating concerns, normalising concerns. They're not peculiar to any one family. Most of the things that people worry about are reasonably common. But catching them early and addressing them and doing something with us and getting the handbrake off some of those conversations is a critical part. So that's the catalyst, that's the driver of our behaviour. So let's think a little bit about where we're at and where other people are at and how that works. And I guess that was one of the interesting things that Tim Aiken talked about yesterday, that going to discussion groups, regardless of where you are, your ability to learn, your ability to observe, your ability to look and take account of things. That's the fantastic thing when we start to understand what's going on around both our own behaviour and other people's behaviour. So that's the trigger for things, either the enabler or the inhibitor, but it's the trigger for our behaviour which starts us in the change process. The second stage of the change process, the word vision came up a little bit yesterday, and we'll talk a fair bit about this. I reckon this is a fantastic, if there's two slides you want to remember, think of those 3 circles and think of this. So we've got a picture up there. Hands up if you're looking at a picture of a young housemaid. We've got a few. Hands up if you're looking at the mother-in-law. Hands up if you were out last night with Dave Morgan and you can't see much other than the blurred dot. So my point, so we can spend a little bit of time. So we've got a housemaid here, that's her shoulder with the neck on her dress, that's her chin bone as she's looking away, the tip of her nose, her eye socket, she's looking out over here with a bonnet on her head. If you need help with the mother-in-law, then you help I can't give you. My point here is that we're looking at a fairly simple piece of information, but we're seeing different things in there. And with farm succession conversations, that's quite often the norm. Based on perspective, based on sibling rank, based on generation, based on being an in-law that's come from a different environment, based on whatever it could be. But we've all got our own perspective on what we see, the same bit of information and what we take out of it. So in managing change, what's important here? Vision's critical. In farm succession, vision is saying we have got a clarity around what success for the business looks like, and we've got critical to say we've got clarity around what success for the family looks like. And sometimes there's a bit of distance in there and fresh air amongst them, and sometimes they overlap, and sometimes there's different people doing different things in those. So that's the vision part. Success for the business, success for the family. The other word's just as critical, and it represents a change on where we were 50 years ago. What's shared vision compared to vision? So shared vision means to me that we have got engagement from the stakeholders in our family business, and they are part of the process. Their opinions are valued. Their opinions may reflect where we end up within the vision. And it actually starts to develop a behaviour of communication and business planning and progress in families that we can embed and empower families to achieve. Quite different to historically, I guess, on what farm succession used to be about. 40, 50 years ago, Dad would go to the lawyer, have the conversation, on the folder, on the shelf, and end of story. If you want to know what's in my will, son, wait till I die, you'll find out. That was historically how it used to be. Oldest boy got the farm, girl's got a canteen of cutlery. Not asking you to like it, we're just saying run with it. That's the kind of stuff which has brought, when we go back to that sad stuff, that's the stories that have brought actually still some collateral damage to the table in terms of people unwilling to get involved in this, or perhaps shaded how they think and operate. I had an example last week in the Bay of Plenty where we had seriously clear vision from Dad at the table. Son was 30-something years old and going pretty good, managing 10,000 stock units, so more than useful in terms of what he was doing. 3 times in the conversation, Dad said, here's what you need to be doing. And I'm thinking, right. So when we point a finger out there at saying what someone needs to do, that's called masturbating. You must, you need, you have to. When you're telling them something like that, there's 3 fingers pointing back at me. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? How am I behaving? And every time Dad said to son, and it was meant as a compliment, the intent was a compliment, because he prefaced it with said, my son's very smart, got a degree, and he's damn good at managing stock. All positive, and then bang, you need to. And every time he said that, the son's head went down a drop and down a drop. So Dad had vision about the business. He knew how capable his son was, and he had plans flying along up here. The son was saying, it's not my move, man, it's yours. So that's the connection that really becomes important. And sitting down as a family and getting those things on the table and talking about them without that going on and without people getting defensive and putting heat into it and keeping the light in there, we will spend some time and get shared vision on what it is. It may be some compromise from Dad. It won't maybe. It will be some compromise from Dad. It will probably be some compromise from the son. probably from his wife and probably mum and probably the daughter as well. So that's the process of shared vision. Critical in farm succession, critical I think in anything you do in your business. If you're just doing a straight business plan, and I know Jack Welch said management's fine as far as it goes, but he said leadership is the key to your business. So this is what leadership is about in any change you want to implement in your business. If you have a vision for your business, and it's critical that every other stakeholder in your business connects and engages and empowers you to deliver on that, then it has to be shared. They have to have some engagement in there. And note I use the word opinion. And there's a difference between having an opinion and having a vote. And my wife struggled with this when the girls bring their boyfriends home. She thinks she's got a vote. I'm encouraging her to think she's got an opinion. It's not working so well for her, I tell you. But let's think a little bit about how this is going in any change you do in your business. And you'll have a vision quite for where this is going to go, 5, 10, some time down the track. Think consciously about who's important to take with you on the ride and how do you engage them in building the vision and connecting the dots in terms of what needs to happen, which is the next piece we're going to talk about, but actually getting the engagement and commitment with it. Come back to the advanced party guys. We talked about trust and respect and that kind of stuff. That's critical to getting this going. So that's the really powerful tool I think we can, and that's what my job is to help families do this. Take the heat out of the conversations, keep the light going in there, create an environment where we can get the best out of us, get people prepared and give them the information that they need for this, give them the speaking spoon and get that around the table where no questions, no judgments made on what they're thinking about their personal aspirations or how it might sit, but get all that on the table. Understand what the capability of the business is at today. Put the balance sheet up there. Put the trends on the profit and loss up there. They're the two things that will determine the capability for if we're going to create something for the family. That's the fuel tank that we've got to drive it on. So get the information out there. That's something that historically, I guess, didn't happen. That farmers didn't used to talk about death, didn't talk about money, didn't talk about sex. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But nowadays the kids, if you don't tell them, they'll Google it. We don't have much of an option there. So we might as well get it out there and get some feedback while we can on it. So let's think a little bit about the next 2 steps in the change management process. There's a really great, Jason Archer talked yesterday a little bit about setting goals. So developing a plan is the SMART goal stuff, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound, all those sorts of things in there. Once we know we've got clarity around what success for the business looks like, then we can start to develop a plan. So I think Jason talked a little bit about setting the bar up here and then having the performance measurements on the way through to achieve where you want. So we can do that. We can set big, hairy, audacious goals in our business and then figure out what are the incremental things we need to do, the steps to get there. And importantly, what are the enablers and the critical things we need to do to enable each of those steps to be achieved. So that's one way of developing a plan. The second way is actually saying we've got a business here on this platform and saying what do we think we can do in the next 2 years, what do we think we can do in the next 2 years, and we can grow it from the ground up. And it doesn't matter too much either way, as long as we've got structure around how we develop the plan. It doesn't have to be complicated. The guy Jim Horan's written a book called The One-Page Business Plan. It can be as simple as that. But the critical thing is it's a one page, it's a piece of paper, it's written down, it's dated, it's got objectivity in there, and it's got clarity in there. I was doing some work with a family that they got sent some stuff by New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and they got some great stuff going on and great resources, but they sent him a book that thick to develop a business plan. And he said, oh, you see, look, there's one really good page in here. I'm thinking, oh, yeah. So after 10 minutes of trying to find it, he abandoned it and told me what was on the page. So that's kind of the connection we sometimes think about a business plan and say, yeah, well, it's got to be for smart people or whatever. No, it doesn't. Business plans are actually what people own. It's got to be purposeful and fit for purpose for them. So it doesn't have to be complicated. But it does mean that once we've written it down, we can share it, and we can measure it, and we can monitor it. Established capability. What's that about in farm succession? I think probably that's when Andy introduced that concept a little bit about the complexity of business nowadays. It demands a much higher level of performance. We need bigger skills. We didn't used to have, so GST was a bit of a landmark for those who were farming pre-GST because it made farmers accountable for some finances, gave them some tools a little bit as well, but just shook their business up a little bit to take a step forward. We've got a raft of stuff going on now that I'm not going to dredge over the old coals about occupational safety, health and environment, So we know our business needs to be flying up here. People who've been in business for 30 years have had the luxury of taking the small steps as the changes have come in to deliver at that level. For the young roosters coming in, we're asking them just, to plug straight in at that level. The good thing about that is they don't know anything different, so they're up for that. That's not daunting for them like we think it might be. So there's no great dramas with it. So that's the capability that we're demanding in our business. In family businesses, sometimes we're asking a parent to actually do a performance review on their children. That gets a little bit tough. We had a situation in North Otago some time ago now, and the dad, mum and dad were running a 1.5 labour unit property and going pretty good. Dad had said to the neighbour who I knew, how do you motivate a 21-year-old to get out of bed before 12 o'clock, lunchtime on a weekend? So they were having a few issues, they sort of knew that. Dad knew what capability they needed to run the business, and the son didn't measure up. His siblings had both said the biggest problem we have in the business is that Jimmy hasn't got the wheels to run it. But for 18 months we'd talked, trying to get them to the table to have a bit of a discussion around this. We eventually got to the table, and I said to the son, 5 years' time your life's rocking and rolling. What do you think it's about? He said, not looking at mum and dad, he said, I think I'd like to drive trucks. I don't really think I'd like to be farming. And poof, all the heat went out of it. So it would take 18 months for him to get to just a really simple thing. So he knew he wasn't capable, didn't have the passion for it. Mum and dad knew he wasn't capable, but you can't ask a parent to do performance management on their son. But so that's really all it took to probably, release them from that sort of thing to understand capability. The other side of the coin on capability is managing risk. And working for a bank, we know a little bit about risk. Bankers and lawyers and accountants have 3-day conferences on risk. But in family situations, let's think a little bit about that. Let's think about going back to our investor circle, the risk of our capital, and we have structures in place to try and protect that against all sorts of attacks, be it liquidators, be it rest home, be it whoever. So there's that sort of a risk. We've got key person risk in our business. We've got a wee bit of homework for you on the last page of the booklet, where if you've been bored, you'd probably flick through the book to find something interesting. Well, that's the last page. So we've got a checklist in there which talks a little bit about the risk that business proprietors carry around up here. All the smarts, the intellect they have around their business which sits up here and nowhere else. And when the logging truck takes you out in the morning, that's going down with you. So that's a serious business risk. We've got young families and businesses who are going to spend 30 years of working in the business, and they don't necessarily have an equitable share. We had a situation in Canterbury where the son, I think, had a brain aneurysm and lights went out, and there was the daughter and a couple of kids, no assets in the business. Their financial future was in fact lying in tatters until they had a life policy in state. So all of a sudden, the key people in our business actually is saying we want to protect the business against the risk of those key people, but also these people are individuals in our family. We need to put some things around there. So it's just being conscious a little bit about that. So that's establishing capability. So, where are we at with it? I think there's a really good comment Lorna Hunn made yesterday, and Toyota Motor Company made this thing famous. How they set up their empire was a one-liner: continuous incremental improvement. So let's think a little bit about that, and that's what Lorna talked about, incremental improvement and that. I think Sharon might also talk a bit about some incremental improvement and stuff there. Farm succession, to me, is about continuous incremental improvement. Around communication, around how our business operates, around how it documents what we're about and what we're going to plan, and how it measures against that. When we start to look at those tools, I thought it was kind of interesting on Alistair's little wee innovation on farm management with his, I don't know if they've trademarked the spate meter instead of a plate meter, but expect to see that being trademarked. But it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as that. The little tools that we have, and that's a little bit of the checklist you have in the back page of your program, are just that. Let's make a start with it. I guess the biggest danger we have is that 30 minutes on, you're going to go away and you're going to have a fantastic presentation coming up for you next by Mike. But let's take something away from this. If you do nothing else, go and have a look at the 5 questions in the back of your program and tick some boxes there and decide what you're going to do with it. Alternatively, think about the 3 roles in your business and think about how you want to manage change and transition around those. Or the other thing you could take away is the 2 words shared vision, and go and do something with that. If you've got a clear vision, let's think about sharing it and engaging other people. So that's me. We started 10 minutes early. We're going to finish 11 minutes early.
You've created a good opportunity for some for some good questions, because you've asked some hard questions, Tony. So don't go too far. So I think we can take 5 to 10 minutes of questions. So have we got a starter for 10 here? I'm sure we do. Yep, in the front. Do we just get a microphone? Thanks, Rhys.
Thanks, Rhys. Just reading your last question. If you were incapacitated earlier this morning, would most of your knowledge and experience be replicated outside of your head? So we had one of our deer farmers a few years ago got killed in an accident, and that's what the son said he really struggled with. It was all in Dad's head, and you know, there's the farm IQ thing, but are there more tools out there? Maybe Andy might be able to answer that.
Well,
I'll start.
Tony, have a crack.
I'll start. I guess one of the things I encourage families to think about is whose responsibility is that, and it's not necessarily where the information sits. It doesn't sit just with that. There's 4 stages of learning, which is really interesting, and you can do this in anything, and I actually do it with my kids with my lack of ability on IT stuff. So the first stage of learning is unconscious incompetence. So let's think about a little kid and riding a bike. So at the age of 6 months, we can't speak, we don't know what a bike is, so we don't know we can't ride a bike. So that's unconscious incompetence. I don't know what I can't do and what I'm not good at. Then I see my older brother or sister riding a bike at the age of 3. So I've become consciously incompetent. I now know some skills that I don't have and can't do. By the age of 10, I'm consciously competent. I can ride a bike, trainer wheels on it, lost a bit of skin off my knees, doing a few things like that, concentrate like hell, but I can ride a bike. By the age of 16, I become unconsciously competent. I can ride a bike, no hands, talk on my cell phone, probably text another one because I've got to, and all sorts of things. So that's the level where most farmers are operating their business. Taking me a while to get there, but I was going to get there. Unconsciously incompetent, so farmers actually are doing stuff, they don't actually formalise the thinking that's going around. They're seeing stuff in their business, be it livestock, be it pasture, they're reacting to it and anticipating and thinking ahead for next year and 6 months and rah, rah, rah. And that's really hard. So how do we unpack that? So that's where I say it's collective responsibility. So for the kids, if you're in the truck with Dad and it goes quiet, poke them. What are you thinking? What are you seeing? What are you reacting to? How does it work? And help unpack that unconscious competence, because that's where the gold mine is, and it's terribly difficult for experienced people to actually formalise that and slow down and think a little bit. And you're not going to take a notebook and write all that stuff down because there's 100,000 of these things going on in you. But that's the process. So let's put collective responsibility out there, and actually give kids the permission to say, what are you thinking? What are you seeing? You know, how does it work? So I'm like that with IT. I know I am unconsciously incompetent, and I get frustrated as hell with that, but my kids help me.
Great, Tony. Next question. Yep. Steve. And no, we might need it just for recording, because remember this has been live streamed, so it's better to talk into the microphone.
Yeah, okay. We've started a family succession plan for the last 2 years and set it up into a company. with another partner who has similar children that may come into the business later on. But how do you actually get your children to actually invest in that business? You know, like my son's pretty smart. He's set up a few houses in town. He gets some good rents in from those. He's going well. That capital would help our business go forward very quickly. But how do you get the confidence for him to put that in that business when he turns around and says to you, well, Dad, you'll fall off the perch someday and I can get it all for nothing. So then I'll be a bigger shareholder than my sister. So she'll have to do what I say. So, you know, how do you encourage that in your family to say, hey, listen, this is what we're giving to you guys, you know, you have to get on board, you know, and come in and, hey, come on, what about putting your stuff on the line like we have?
Sky always asks curly ones, Tony.
So which one of those 15 questions do you want me to answer? I'll unpack them a little bit because my memory's crap, from the back to the front a little bit. So you said you need to put your capital in. Hello, what have we got going on here? So you need to put your capital in. I'm saying, is that a question or you're telling him what he has to do?
Oh, no. We're not telling him what to do.
You do if you say you need to. So all right, so I'll let that one go to the wicketkeeper. What you're really asking him about is, let's talk about your investment decisions. And he's saying, I've got these investments going on where I'm not investing anything in terms of my time. I'm getting this capital return and rah, 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 rah. And that's what he's looking at. So I think you need to sit down and compare notes a little bit about what your investment strategy is for each of you, what you're trying to, just go back to Jason. What do we want out of this? How do we get there? That type of thing. Go through that strategy and just sit down and engage with it. Don't expect it's a 5-minute conversation. The old dripping tap thing. If you think you're going to take them on a journey, then get the tap dripping and get them there over time.
What happens if you fall off the perch in the meantime?
Well, that's not your worry, is it? So I guess, so that's the other thing. I knew I'd miss some out. So let's talk about what that's about. So you've actually talked about an expectation that whether he was taking the mickey or whether that's actually what he thinks, I don't know.
Oh no, he's like his mother, he's dead serious.
Well, he had to get it from someone, didn't he?
It's like working with his mother.
You don't work with his mother, you work for his mother. So that's the conversation. When we talk about shared vision, we've got the window's closed in terms of what we could have done historically. But let's talk a little bit about those expectations from an early age. My uncle said to me, with 2 daughters, he said, sex education's really simple. Give them some information early. If you give them too much information, their eyes will glaze over and you'll lose them. They'll probably get embarrassed and go to their bedroom or whatever. If you don't give them enough information, they'll ask. And if you give them the right amount, they'll say, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. So this is the same thing. Give them some information early. That's what I'm saying. The kids are up for these discussions. I wasn't with my dad, but my kids are with me. They can talk about money. They can talk about stuff from an early age. Let's set the expectation. So there's an expectation there about saying we've got a pie, how do we cut it up? And I'm saying we can be smarter and brighter than that and saying we've got to start a capital base, a commodity business going on here. What can we create? And engage them in building that.
Thanks very much.
You didn't sound convinced.
Next question. Just can't see. Yeah, Colin. Just there in front of you, Reece.
I wonder if you'd like to comment. A lot of businesses sort of move, particularly, and not much so much perhaps in the dairy industry, but certainly in the dairy industry, where they've moved from being family-only businesses to where there's equity partners and other people involved, but still within families, and just how you see that whole thing moving and perhaps passing that baton from one generation to the next without the expectation that just because you've created it, the kids should actually pick it up necessarily and run. And in a lot of those cases, of course, they've got their own lives, they've got their own professions, and not necessarily all back having to work on the farm, but it's just a slightly different dynamic to what you've probably covered here this morning.
Yeah, I don't see it's a different dynamic. In fact, that is those 3 circles. Let's think about the equity partnership has clarity around the investors and what their role is. and we've got clarity around the investment manager and what their role is, and we've got great formality across that. So I think all we've done is that we've got clarity around those roles in equity partnerships and documented it. And importantly, we have illustrated to the kids that you are not required to come back to this business to make it happen. There's an opportunity, but not an obligation to come into the business. And here's the terms of engagement. Ticket to the game looks like come here with $500,000 and come here with skills and rah, rah, rah. So I think the equity partnership is actually a great, it's a great structure. It puts great clarity and so we can do that at home. And we have that. We have kids coming into stock and plant partnerships. So we've got a bit of that. We don't document, I guess, the relationship between that like we do in an equity partnership. So I just see that's a fantastic tool to learn what the hell we can from it and embrace it, because we can replicate that within family, we can replicate that with outsiders. Does that answer your question?
Good. One last question, Chris.
How important do you feel it is to involve the family members that are not in the business after the succession process has started? You know, how often should you review that and go over that type of thing?
Yeah, great question. And I think that's something that's changed. What we used to do historically was that Jimmy bought the farm 20 years ago from Mum and Dad for $400,000 and nobody knew. And then we actually look at it now and it's worth $4 million, and the other siblings are saying, sure, that's not fair. But at the time, the market value was 400. So that's the benefit, I think, of engaging them early, asking for their opinion. And if they're not travelling well with it, if I say, yeah, I'm okay with that, and their body language is saying something different, let's find out what they're thinking. Because if they're thinking that way and everyone else is thinking that way, the longer it goes, the bigger the gap. So bring them in there and say, yes, we value your opinion. You aren't necessarily the A team. We've got Mum and Dad of the A team and you're part of the B team over here. So think about priorities and where you fit with that. But yeah, we value your opinion. And actually we can accommodate some of those things. And I guess they say a kilogram of hand-up's worth a ton of inheritance. So sometimes to understand what their aspirations are early is we can enable them to do things. It doesn't have to be giving them cash. It might be the ability to borrow against an asset or something. I don't know. It could be anything. But I think that's the thing, that the kids are now up for that discussion, and I think it does nothing but good to understand what they're thinking and why, and for them to share the vision.